April 1945. The roar of distant artillery became the soundtrack to Sophie Müller's life. In her apartment in Munich, the air was thick with ash and fear. Each tremor of the ground, each distant thud, tightened the knot in her stomach. Her husband, Heinrich, the silent, omnipresent head of the Gestapo, had been a ghost even before the war's end. Now, as the Reich collapsed around them, he was utterly gone. She clung to her children, Reinhard and Eleanor, their faces pale in the flickering candlelight as the world outside descended into fire and chaos. What little she knew of Heinrich's final instructions were vague, almost dismissive of the coming storm. They were simply to stay put, to weather it out. But the storm was not merely shells and bombs. It was the inevitable reckoning that followed. The German High Command, in the dying spasms of their regime, held a peculiar contempt for their adversaries. They saw Allied intelligence as a patchwork of naive idealists and bureaucratic paper shufflers, easily misled by the Gestapo's intricate web of deception. Orders from Berlin, even in the final weeks, emphasized absolute secrecy, the compartmentalization of information so complete that even the left hand often knew nothing of the right. The assumption, unspoken but deeply ingrained, was that Heinrich Müller, master of clandestine operations, would simply vanish, his trail utterly erased by the inferno. His family, tucked away in Munich, would be irrelevant. An anonymous civilian, Frau Müller, living out her days. A misplaced confidence that would soon unravel. But the meticulous records being compiled by the advancing Allies told a very different story. By May of 1945, the war in Europe was over, but the hunt had only just begun. The Allied Counterintelligence Corps, or CIC, along with their British counterparts, had an extensive list of high-value targets, and Heinrich Müller sat near the very top. Not for his family, but for the man himself. He was the keeper of unimaginable secrets, the networks of agents, the names of informers, the inner workings of the extermination camps, even the identities of Soviet infiltrators the Gestapo had been hunting. Allied dossiers, meticulously cross-referenced from captured documents and prisoner interrogations, left little doubt as to his significance. They knew his name, his rank, his notorious reputation, and crucially, they knew his wife's name, Sophie Müller. The Gestapo chief's elaborate anonymity was already proving to be a fallacy. The clash came swiftly and without fanfare. Within weeks of Munich's liberation, CIC agents, acting on intelligence, gleaned from a bewildering array of German administrative records and even neighborhood informants, located Sophie Müller. Her initial encounter with Allied officers was likely a profound shock. She was no longer just a civilian. She was the wife of Heinrich Müller, a ghost the world desperately wanted to find. According to later declassified CIC reports, her apartment was kept under surveillance, and she was brought in for repeated interrogations. The interrogators, calm and methodical, displayed an alarming knowledge of her husband's career, his movements, and even personal details she might have thought secure. The questions hammered home. Where was he? What did he tell you? Did he have a plan? Her steadfast answer, repeated consistently, was that she had no idea of his whereabouts. He had simply disappeared into the chaos of Berlin. Yet the Allies knew she held a crucial, if perhaps unwitting, piece of the puzzle. The pressure was immense, a silent battle of wills in the shattered heart of Germany. Sophie's initial reaction was likely a mixture of genuine ignorance and a desperate attempt to protect herself and her children. But as the interrogations continued, as the CIC agents laid out the extent of their knowledge, a new understanding began to dawn. This was not a disorganized rabble. This was a formidable, relentless machine. The details they knew, the precision of their questioning, revealed an intelligence apparatus far more sophisticated than the Nazi propaganda had ever allowed. She claimed her husband had not contacted her since the fall of Berlin, nor had he left any instructions for escaping to South America or establishing new identities. To the interrogators, this sounded plausible but incomplete. They pressed, drawing out every last detail about his personal habits, his associates, any snippet that might betray his final destination. But the trail remained cold, a testament to Müller's ultimate success in vanishing, or perhaps simply dying in the rubble. The strategic importance of finding Müller transcended mere retribution. He was a walking archive of the Third Reich's darkest secrets, secrets the Soviets would also kill to possess. The Allies understood that Müller's information could reshape the nascent Cold War landscape, exposing everything from deeply embedded spies to the scientific personnel crucial to atomic weapons research. His disappearance left a massive void, fueling decades of speculation. In the absence of a body or a definitive eyewitness account, Allied intelligence was forced to rely on the fragmentary testimony of people like Sophie Müller, and the detailed but ultimately inconclusive reports from those who claimed to have seen him in the final days of the Berlin bunker. The challenge was immense. How to prove a negative or track a phantom? The inability to locate him, despite their relentless efforts and the pressure on his family, was a frustrating anomaly in an otherwise successful intelligence campaign. The Müller family found themselves caught in an unenviable limbo. They were neither directly implicated in his crimes nor entirely free from suspicion. According to British intelligence files, Sophie Müller and her children continued to live in Munich under intermittent surveillance, particularly in the immediate post-war years. Allied intelligence kept their files open on Heinrich Müller for decades, constantly evaluating new leads, even considering the possibility of him living in the Soviet bloc. Each new theory, each scrap of information, invariably led back to the family, searching for a sign, a slip, any indication of contact. Sophie Müller herself would live until 1990, always maintaining her ignorance of her husband's ultimate fate. Her daughter, Eleanor, later married and lived an unremarkable life, forever shadowed by a father who became history's most elusive ghost. What Allied intelligence truly knew then was this: Heinrich Müller had a wife and 2 children in Munich. They knew their addresses, their routines, and their every word spoken during interrogations. They knew the family was, by all appearances, utterly cut off from the Gestapo chief after April 1945. They knew Sophie Müller was a seemingly credible witness, but also one with every reason to protect herself and her children from further entanglement. This intricate cat-and-mouse game, played out in the ruined streets of post-war Germany, highlighted both the incredible reach of Allied intelligence and its frustrating limitations. They could track a family, monitor their lives, and tirelessly pursue a lead, but ultimately they could not conjure a man who had chosen or been forced to vanish entirely. The fate of Heinrich Müller, the architect of terror, remains an enduring enigma, and the shadow of that mystery hung heavy over his family for the rest of their lives.